So far we have seen how to create multi-agentic applications by using Crew AI, and then we also learned how to provide different tool access to LLM like math tool, and also we learned how to use Epify and scrape a website, right? And now let's see how to provide an LLM access to tools like SQL Database Toolkit, and also how to use SQLAlchemy, and how to create an SQL agent and perform different SQL operations, right? So let's try to create a new Python file, and let's save it as SQL Database Tool SQL Agent and click on save. And before we start anything, make sure you install LangChain OpenAI package in case if you haven't installed already. That way we will be able to communicate with our OpenAI LLM. Okay. And now once you install the package, the next thing is let's try to load the required modules. So here we are using OpenAI, which is from LangChain LLMs. This is to communicate with our OpenAI LLM. That is the one we will be using as our LLM. And then get OpenAI callback. So this is from LangChain callbacks. So here you can see the description. This is used to get the token and the cost information, right? So that is why we are using this function. And then the next one is load underscore .env. This is from .env and also the OS module, right? Now inside this .env file, we stored our OpenAI API key. I've already shown you how to get the OpenAI API key in the previous lectures. So make sure you get the OpenAI API key and store it inside this environment file. And once you store the API key inside this environment file, now the first thing is let's try to load the environment variables from this environment file by using load underscore .env function. And then the next thing is let's try to read the API keys by using OS module .getEnv function, and this is the key name, right? So whatever the name we stored inside this .env file, we are giving that name so that we will get the API value. Okay. And once you read the API key, next thing is let's try to store this inside this environment variable OpenAI underscore API underscore key. And now let's try to initialize our OpenAI LLM. So we imported this OpenAI from LangChain LLMs. So we are using OpenAI as our LLM. And now let's try to define a user defined function that can return the total number of tokens spent. Okay. So this is a function that is count underscore tokens. This is our own function. This is not built in. And here we are calling this function, which is from LangChain callbacks. And by using this, we are trying to get the token information. That is the total number of tokens spent. By using this function, we are trying to get the attribute value. That is total number of tokens. And we will call this function to get the total number of tokens spent. Okay. And in case if you want to learn more about this, you can always go to LangChain and try to read more information, right? So let me quickly show you. This is the LangChain official documentation for get underscore OpenAI callback function. So you can always go here and see what are the parameters and how to implement this function, right? So you can see the example also. And then the next thing is we are trying to import metadata from SQLAlchemy. Okay. So this is the official web page of SQLAlchemy. So SQLAlchemy is the Python SQL toolkit and object relational mapper that gives application developers the full power and flexibility of SQL. So by using this SQLAlchemy, we can map database tables to Python classes. So that is the intent of using SQLAlchemy. Okay. That is what we are trying to use here, and we are trying to import metadata class which is from SQLAlchemy. And now let's try to initialize metadata and assign that to metadata object variable. Okay. So this metadata, this is a container object that keeps together many different features of a database. So if you want to see the documentation, let me take you there. So this is the complete documentation of metadata class which is from SQLAlchemy. So here you can go through how to import and how to create an object and how you can create a table and utilize it, right? So you have the complete documentation here. So you can go through if you want to explore more, okay? So we have initialized our metadata object. And now the next thing is, let's try to import column, integer, string, table, date and float. So we are trying to import different classes again from SQLAlchemy. So our intent is to create a table. So let's try to create a table. So we are trying to initialize this table which is from SQLAlchemy, right? So we initialized our table class and we assigned that to stocks variable, and the table name is stocks, and the metadata object which we have created before. And then here we are trying to create 4 columns. The first column name is observations. So in short, we are giving OBS underscore ID. The data type of this column is integer and the primary key is equal to true. So that means this is the primary key. And the second column is stock underscore ticker and it is of type string and we are allowing 4 characters. Nullable is equal to false. So that means we have to provide the value for this. It is not null. And then price, that is the third column. It is of type float and again nullable is equal to false. And again the fourth column is date. It is of type date and nullable is equal to false. So with this we created this table and named it as stocks, right? And now let's try to import create engine. This is a function again from SQLAlchemy, right? Let me take you to the official page. So if you want to go through this, you have a complete documentation here inside this SQLAlchemy. So the intent of this engine is the starting point for any SQLAlchemy application, right? So this is how it starts: the engine, pool, dialect, DB API and the database. So it's home base for the actual database and its DB API delivered to the SQLAlchemy application through a connection pool and a dialect, which describes how to talk to a specific kind of database or DB API combination, right? So this is the starting point for any SQLAlchemy application, right? So here you have the complete documentation. So you can see here we have to provide the URL in order to create an engine object, right? So here they have given some examples as well, which you can go through, like how to connect to different databases: MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and SQLite. This is the one we will be using, right? And others. And this is for the API, right? So depending on your requirement, you can implement. And now let's try to create the engine object. So we have imported this create engine function from SQLAlchemy. So let's try to use that function and pass the URL, which is nothing but SQLite. So SQLite is an open source relational database, right? So by using this create engine function, we are passing this and we are getting the engine object. And inside this metadata class, we have a function called create underscore all. And for that, we can pass the engine object that we have created. So let's try to call the create all and then pass this engine object. Okay, we have created our table. So here you can see the description of this method. It will create all tables stored in this metadata, right? So with this, we created our table. And now we have to insert the values for these 4 columns. And one of them is of type date, right? So in order to insert date time value, we are trying to import date time class from date time module. And now let's try to insert around 10 values. So the column number 1 is observations ID, which is nothing but the primary key and is of type integer. So that is what we are giving. And stock underscore ticker, that is the stock name is ABC. And the column number 3 is price. We are giving as 200. And date, so here we are trying to create a date, 2050 January 1st, right? And again for the second column, 2 ABC 208 is the price and 2025 January 2nd. So similarly, we are trying to create the column values for the remaining. So we have a total of 10 column values. So now let's try to insert these values to our stocks table. So in order to insert, so this is for the create, and now we are trying to insert. So here we are trying to import the function called insert, which is from SQLAlchemy. So by using that, let's try to create a function called insert underscore OBS. So here we are trying to define a function called insert underscore OBS. So that is all the observations. So we will pass each observation one by one. So we have a total of 10. We will pass one by one, and here we are trying to call this insert function, which is from SQLAlchemy, which we just imported, and we are trying to insert each value. So the first one is whatever we get from these observations. So the 0th index value is the ID. So that is what we are assigning. And then here it is OPS of 1 means it will give us the stock underscore ticker. So that is what ABC. And then index value of 2 is 200. So that is the price. And this is the date, right? So that is what we are setting here. So we defined a insert underscore observations function so that we will pass each observation. We have a total of 10 and we will insert inside our stocks table. And also let's execute this statement, right? So this is our connection object. So we are trying to begin the engine and then execute the insert statement one by one, right? So now let's try to pass these values and call this function insert underscore observations. So inside observations, this is a list of lists. So we have a total of 10, and for 10 times we are calling this function and we are passing one by one observation. So for each observation we are getting each one by one and then passing here to this function, and we are trying to insert the value. Okay, and now let's try to import SQL database, so which is from LangChain utilities. Okay, so we are trying to import SQL database class, and also let's try to import SQL database chain class, which is from LangChain experimental SQL. Okay, let's try to create this SQL database object. So that is the database we will be using, and we are passing the engine object, right, which we have created before by using create underscore engine. And now let's use this SQL database chain and create an object. So that is the SQL chain, and to this chain we are trying to bind LLM and the database object that we have created, and verbose is equal to true. That is, we are providing SQL database access to our LLM by using this SQL database chain, and verbose is equal to true means we will see the complete execution log in the terminal. And now we have to create the agent. So that is the next step, so that we can assign this task, right? So let's try to import this create underscore SQL underscore agent function from LangChain agents, and also from LangChain agents let's try to import SQL database toolkit class from LangChain agents agent underscore toolkits. Okay, and we also need the agent type. So this class is again from LangChain agents agent types. So once we imported all these classes, now the next thing is let's try to create a SQL agent by using create underscore SQL agent, which we just imported from LangChain agents. So by using this create underscore SQL underscore agent, let's try to create an agent, and to this agent we are setting these values. For LLM, we are setting the LLM which we initialized before, which is nothing but our OpenAI LLM, and we are trying to give the tool access, which is nothing but SQL database toolkit, and here we are setting the database, which is nothing but our SQL database, and the LLM, which is nothing but our OpenAI LLM. Verbose is equal to true, and agent type, it is of type 0 short React description. So this is a zero shot agent that does a reasoning step before acting, right? And the max iterations is equal to 3. So now once we created our agent, let's give a task to our agent. So we have provided LLM SQL Database Toolkit access to our agent. So let's assign a task so that our agent will perform the task by accessing SQL database, right? So here we are trying to call count underscore tokens, which we have defined here. So here we are passing agent and the input query, and we are trying to get the total number of tokens spent for this query, right? So the agent executor is whatever the agent that we have created before. And what do you want our agent to do? This is the query. What is the multiplication of the ratio between stock prices for ABC and XYZ in January 3rd and the ratio between the same stock prices on January the 4th, right? So if you see here, we have January 3rd and January 4th, we have ABC, and we also have XYZ stocks, right? So we are asking what is the multiplication of the ratio between stock prices for ABC and XYZ on January 3rd and 4th, and also the ratio between the same stock prices on January 4th also, between 3rd and 4th for those two stocks, right? So let's try to print the results. So let me save this code and let's run the code and see if our agent is able to execute and give us the answer. So it is trying to enter new SQL Agent Executor chain. Okay, so this is our input, that is the query that we gave, and the output is agent stopped due to iteration limit or time limit. Okay, but it understood whatever the query we gave, so it formed the query, right? So select price from stocks where stock ticker is equal to ABC and date is equal to either 3rd or 4th, ordered by date in ascending order. It is trying to sort it. So since we reached the maximum iteration limit, so let's try to increase the iteration limits to, I'm just giving 30. So either we can kill or clear the session. So let's rerun the code. So now you can see the final output, right? So for the stock ABC, this is the January 3rd value 232 and 225 is the January 4th value. So that is what we have created here. So January 3rd for ABC it is 232 and 225 is for January 4th, right? So that is what we are trying to get the ratio. And similarly for the stock XYZ, right? The next thing is what is the multiplication of the ratio, right? So that is what we are trying to get the multiplication value. So it is trying to multiply them and the final answer is this, right? So it is trying to give us the final answer here, output, right? So you can see the complete execution log because we gave purpose is equal to true, right? So here you can see entering new SQL Agent Executor chain, and this is the action it is trying to perform. SQL database list tables, and action input is stocks. I should query the schema of the stocks table to see what columns I can use, and the action is SQL database schema. Action input is stocks, so it created this table with these 4 columns, right? So create table stocks. So these are the values, and I should query the stock prices for ABC and XYZ on January 3rd and January 4th. So it understood the context. And now action is equal to SQL DB query, and action input is equal to, this is the SQL query that it needs to execute. And again it is trying to calculate the ratio, and the next one is for the stock ticker XYZ, and then it is trying to get the ratio and then again multiplication, and finally it is trying to give us the answer, right? So that is how we can ask our agent by providing access to our LLM and also SQL database and execute the queries, right? So instead of this, you can try to replace with different questions and see if it is able to give us the desired output, right? So let's quickly see what we learned here. So the first thing is we installed all the required packages. Here we are using OpenAI as our LLM. So instead of OpenAI paid LLM, you can also use any other open source model as well. That is any model from Hugging Face, or you can also use Olama, right? And here we are trying to import different modules from LangChain and also SQLAlchemy. And here we loaded the environment variables from this environment file. So inside this we stored our OpenAI API key. So that is what we are trying to read, and then we assign that to OpenAI API key environment variable. So either you can set here or you can also pass here as well when you are initializing the OpenAI LLM, right? Here we defined a function called count underscore tokens, which will return us the total number of tokens spent. And here we are using the function called get underscore OpenAI callback to get the total number of tokens spent. And then we created the metadata object, and the next one is we created this table, and here we instantiated the stocks table with 4 columns: observation ID, stock ticker, price, and date. And the next one is we created our engine object. This is the SQLite. So SQLite is the open source relational database, right? And then we are trying to create the table by using create underscore all, and we are passing the engine object, and these are the column values we want for all our columns, the 4 columns, and we are trying to insert 10 different values. And again here we created a user defined function insert underscore observations, and for that we are passing the observations one by one here. So for each value we are trying to insert and then execute the statement. And here we are trying to create the SQL database object, and to that we are passing our engine object. Then the next one is we are using SQL database chain to bind our LLM to the SQL database, and what post is equal to true to see the complete execution log. And once we have the chain, the next thing is we are trying to create the agent. For this agent, we are setting the LLM, and we are also providing tool access, that is SQL Database Toolkit. And for this, we are setting our database and also LLM. And what post is equal to true, agent type is equal to 0 short React description. So that is the agent type we are using, and max iterations. And then here we are trying to give a task to our agent so that it can perform by using the LLM and also toolkit access. So we are calling this user defined function count underscore tokens. Here we need to pass the agent and also the input query. So agent is whatever the agent we created, we are passing that, and also the query is what is the multiplication of the ratio between stock prices for ABC and XYZ in January 3rd and the ratio between the same stock prices on January 4th, right? So we are getting the result. So that is how you can create an agent and try to perform different database operations. And instead of this SQLite, you can try to connect to different databases like MySQL or Oracle, and try to execute different SQL operations and see if it is meeting your business requirement. All right. Thank you.